Shalom, Kahal Yahweh Bashim Yahushua Bashim Kakodash, double honors to the elder apostles and elder bishops of GMS, including the elders that came before them that taught us is true. Shalom and salutations to all the brothers out pushing the word of truth and in sincerity, the hopeful elect tabernacle of David. I'm the brother Yahshua. I'm back with the WW3 Daily update. Shalom and salutations to you as well. This is going to be what we normally do on Tuesday, the Wars and Rumors of War Tuesday, but it's Friday. The last update for this week. And we're just going to let Gonzalo Lira give his rumor, his synopsis, if you will, of what's going on. And the guy is, he's pretty knowledgeable on what's going on, what will happen, why these things are going on. So I'm going to let him speak. I might let him speak the whole 15 minutes, so learn something, right? And for all you haters out there, your thumbs down are welcome. And so are your comments. So be a man and put a comment in there and tell me why you put the thumbs down. And don't be a little bitch, all right? So this is Matthew 24:6. You will hear of wars and rumors of war, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. You hear that, hater? The end is still to come. And it's going to get you and your little thumbs down. So put it there so you can mark yourself. All right? And put a comment. Tell me why you're so fucking butthurt. All right? And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of war. This is King James. See that you be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. And when the end does come, guess what? Your ass is going to be on fire. All right? Because you don't understand what the hell is going on. Let's get that real quick. Keep thy foot. Know ye not that this is the house of the Lord, idiot? Salakia. Ecclesiastes 5:1. Keep thy foot when thou goest to the house of God. Guess what? You thought you were coming to learn about what's going on in World War III. Well, you did, but guess what? You wound up at the house of God. All right. When two or more are gathered in his name, guess what? His name is Yahweh Bahashim Yahushua. And here you are at his house. Be more ready to hear than to give the sacrifice of fools. What does that mean? That means that every word out of your mouth, or every thumbs down, or every comment that you don't make because you're a bitch is on record. For they consider not that they do evil. Right? What else? That's 5:1. Let's go to 2. Be not rash with thy mouth or thy thumbs down, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before the Most High. For the Most High is in heaven, and thou upon the earth. Therefore let thy words be few. All right? For a dream cometh through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by the multitude of his word. And guess what I'm doing? I'm reading the scriptures, dummy. I'm pointing out what's going on here. Anyway, let's let Gonzalo do his thing. Come on, Gonzalo.
Hey, how's it going? So, the question for me is...
Let's get that real quick. Gonzalo Lira again, channel 3 hours ago. February 3rd, 2023. What becomes of NATO after the loss of Ukraine? Let him tell it, right? What he's doing is he's telling you the run up to World War III and what happens at the end of your world. Okay? At the end of your world, those nuclear missiles go off, and anybody that has a problem with it is going to get their ass burned up.
Is what's going to happen to NATO after it's clear that the Ukraine conflict has been lost? Because I tend to be a big picture guy. I like to step back and sort of look at the overall scheme of things, how things are going generally. I'm not really good at the minutia, the military, the day to day. It bores me, quite frankly. I'm much more interested in the overall direction of travel. And so, at this time, when it's becoming increasingly clear that the conflict in Ukraine, from the point of view of NATO, is lost, what is going to become of this military alliance? Because you have to understand what NATO was originally, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It was a defensive pact to prevent the further expansion of the Soviet Union into Western Europe. That was the reason for being of the NATO, of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, this served the Western Europeans fairly well through the Cold War. The Cold War ended, the Soviet Union collapsed, but since then, NATO has not had an actual reason for being. And this is the key issue. As a defensive alliance, it does not have it doesn't have an existential threat. Now, does it? Because during the 90s, it was quite obvious that the Russian Federation was just not up to the task of invading Western Europe. Quite the contrary, they had so many huge problems of their own that they weren't going to bother with Western Europe. And so NATO didn't have a reason for being other than as a way to keep the Western European nations as vassal states of the United States. See? Because NATO allowed the Western European countries to devote very few resources to defense. Why would they spend resources on defense when the American defensive umbrella would be covering them? And so the Western European nations took advantage of this. I mean, NATO basically made of the European nations vassal states of the United States, but sort of as in payment, if you will, the Americans took over the military burden, and the European nations were able to devote an enormous amount of their GDP to internal social welfare programs and making their lives all happy. See? That was basically the compromise between the Western European nations and the United States. We'll provide your defense, and you can spend the money on building your economy and living happily in your social welfare state, right? But so long as we have access to your markets, see, it was that kind of a relationship. Mm-hmm. A little bit like the gangster who goes to the mom and pop store and says, you will protect you, but you let us do what we want. That was basically the deal. Mm-hmm. Now, during the 90s and the 2000s and into the 2010s, right, this worked fairly well for the Europeans. Mm-hmm. But now in this conflict with Ukraine, it's increasingly clear that NATO doesn't have what it takes to win a war. Because make no mistake, this war is not the Kiev regime against Russia. This war is NATO against Russia. The fact that the revelations that have appeared, from Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande, that the Minsk II agreements were just a way to buy time to arm Ukraine, that makes it pretty clear. And the whole point of NATO, since at least the Munich speech that Putin gave in 2007, has been regime change in Russia and hopefully the breakup of Russia. Because what the United States has really wanted, or at least the political leadership in the United States has wanted, is to break up Russia into smaller bite-sized states, like Ukraine. And due to those bite-sized states, what the West did to Ukraine, because Ukraine is a rich country. It has incredible human resources, not to mention natural resources and food supplies and all the rest of it. And yet, Ukraine is one of the poorest countries in Europe, if not the poorest. Well, certainly now it's the poorest country in Europe. Why do you think that was? Because of the exploitation of the United States and Western Europe of Ukraine. And what the Russians wanted to prevent is exactly this exploitation of their country. They didn't want it broken up so that each of these smaller bite-sized countries could be exploited the way Ukraine has been exploited. I mean, underlying all of this conflict, that's the ultimate goal of the West. That's what they wanted to do to Russia, and they failed. And they carried out this war. And what has happened? Well, the Russians have shown themselves more than equal to the task. And NATO threw everything they had at it, economic sanctions in particular. And what happened with those economic sanctions? They literally bounced off of Russia and boomeranged back at the Europeans, at the NATO states, and also secondarily to the United States. It's hurt them much more than Russia. And so NATO, as a military alliance, is proving itself to be kind of pointless because it can't win. And that's the whole point to have a military alliance. Huh? And so the countries of Western Europe are starting to realize this. And so the American leadership class realizes that it's going to have to pivot and find a new enemy quickly. Because at this time, it's very apparent that NATO cannot take on Russia. The Ukraine situation was the absolutely best case in terms of taking on Russia. See, they had an enormous Ukraine army, well equipped, with all kinds of fortifications and everything necessary to win. Win in the Donbass and potentially even have some incursions into Crimea and perhaps take Crimea, because the West has always had a hard-on for Crimea, because Washington wants Crimea so it can own the Black Sea. But they failed. And so now that this failure is so obvious that you'd have to be a blind man not to see it, well, the Americans have to figure out a way to maintain this alliance, because this alliance, when I talk about the NATO alliance, it's not an alliance. It's a vassalage. It's the system to maintain the Western European nations as vassal states to the global American empire. And so if the NATO pact, if the North Atlantic Treaty Organization starts to collapse internally, i.e., if different countries start waking up and saying to themselves, the Germans, the French, the Brits, the Italians, the Portuguese, whomever, if they start waking up and saying, hey, how come we're in this alliance? This is proving no benefit to us and a whole lot of detriments to us. Why are we in it? Especially now, considering that the Russians view every NATO country as an enemy state and isn't going to be trading with us and isn't going to be helping us in different areas, food, energy resources, and the rest of it. Why are we still in NATO? And so the Americans cannot allow that questioning of NATO. They have to maintain this alliance, which, as I said, is really a vassalage system. They have to maintain it. And so what better way to maintain it than to create a new enemy? I mean, think of it. NATO came to be because it was an alliance to protect Western Europe from the encroachment of the Soviet Union.
Okay, this is very important what he's about to say right here. We'll back it up. Listen to the entirety of what he's saying, and that they had to create a new boogeyman. So in 07 and 08, they came after Russia again. They made them the boogeyman and basically kicked them out of the New World Order because they didn't want to play along, namely Vlad Putin and all the oligarchs. All right, so listen to what he's going to say.
I mean, think of it. NATO came to be because it was an alliance to protect Western Europe from the encroachment of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is no more, but following Putin's 2007 speech, at least, NATO pivoted to have Russia as the enemy. That was the whole point, starting in at least 2007. One could argue since the late 90s, it doesn't really matter, that's really academic, but at this time it's very obvious that NATO is just an alliance aimed towards Russia, the common enemy, right? But the Russians have no imperial ambitions. They have no ambitions to take over Poland or Romania or Moldova or any other country, much less the Baltic states. They care about Russian people, the ethnic Russian people. That's why they're in Ukraine, because they wanted to end the killing, the ethnic genocide that was going to be happening to ethnic Russians in the Donbass region. So once this conflict is over, You know, there might be little skirmishes or little crises in the Baltics and Poland and Romania, you know, sort of like trying to create some sort of, furtherance of this conflict between.
That's where he's wrong, because this conflict is not going to come to an end. It's going to expand. It's going to turn into what we know as World War III. All right, on many different fronts. Okay, which came out in yesterday's report with Nate, the Canadian prepper. He went into the different fronts. Okay, Southeast Asia, the Korean Peninsula, the Valley of Yahushua, which is the Middle East, right? And what's going on right now in Eastern Europe, right? They're not all just going to shut down. It's going to grow. There's a war going on. You can argue it might be over, but it's still going on right there in Africa with Ethiopia and the Tigray, right? The Eritreans or whatever that is. So this is going to grow according to the scriptures, not what somebody thinks. And he's given a great synopsis of what's going. This guy lives in the Ukraine, so he knows what's going on there. Does he know anything about what the scriptures say? No. Okay. So right now he's given his opinion, and everybody has one of those.
NATO and Russia, but it's probably not going to work because the Russians have no interest in those countries. They just care about their own people. And they have bigger fish to fry. They're prepared for a war with NATO, no question. Do they have imperial ambitions for NATO territory? No. I mean, it's very obvious. They don't care. They care about their own people. They've got bigger fish to fry than to go out there and go to Poland or someplace else. And so there might be, at the end of this conflict in Ukraine, some little skirmishes, but they're not going to be, they're probably, I hope, they're not going to be flashpoints into some sort of real, Ukraine 2 conflict, say over Poland or the Baltics. Let's hope that that doesn't happen. But look,
it is going to happen. Okay. When they shall say peace and safety, then destruction, sudden destruction shall come upon them.
Assume for the sake of argument that it doesn't happen. The United States, as a priority, will want to maintain this alliance because, as I say, it's a vassalage of Western Europe. And so, how do you maintain a group of people together who have very different priorities and very different objectives? You create a common enemy. That's how NATO was held together after the end of the Cold War. Look, the Russians are the enemy. But now that Russia will have succeeded and Russia will be too big and strong to really have a second round, well, they're going to have to pivot in a different direction. And that's going to be China. See, a lot of people have been talking about the Americans going to war with China, and they were talking about it like, 2027, 2030. But all of a sudden, American military officers are talking about a conflict with China by 2025.
Sounds like World War III. Okay. It's not. None of this is going away. All right. Who are the allies of China? That would be Russia. That would be Korea, or North Korea, if you will. All right. That would be Iran. Okay. So this is going nowhere.
And Jens Stoltenberg, the president of NATO, is saying that, Russia and China are the same thing, and that basically, a conflict with Russia or a conflict with China, it's the same mission. See what they're doing there? See, the Americans are trying to pivot this alliance from Russia, which they can't defeat, which they are showing that they are unable to defeat. They're going to pivot it towards China. And it will be in the Americans' best interest to create a war with China as quickly as possible so as to maintain this vassalage system with Europe. Now, why do the Americans want to maintain this vassalage system with Europe? Why do they want to hold on to their European colonies? Ultimate irony of ironies, isn't it? Why do they want to maintain their European colonies? Very simple. You see, the European colonies, the European Union, represents a lot of money to a lot of different factions within the United States regime. The military industrial complex, for instance, all those weapons that are being shipped, European weapons that are being shipped from Europe to Ukraine, it's emptying out the militaries of the European nations. And so the European nations, where are they buying their gear from? Or they're going to buy their gear from? From the United States. The same with energy resources. The Americans blew up Nord Stream 2 and 1, and so the Europeans have to buy liquefied natural gas from the Americans. You see? You see how it works? And so, in order to maintain this vassalage system, in order to ensure that no country in NATO splits from the NATO alliance and tries to create a separate peace with the Russians and thereby have access to the resources of the Russians, well, the Americans are going to take this alliance and pivot it towards China and involve Europe in a war with China, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
It's called World War III. Because Babylon the Great can't keep their nose out of everybody's business, right? They covet fields and take them by force. Let's get that. We'll go ahead and close. You can watch this is what? 5 more minutes? 2 or 3? Gonzalo Lira again. Very, very introspective opinion right there. He brought a lot of things together. Very good. Let's get this and close it. They covet fields. Who is they? Right? It's Babylon the Great. They covet fields and take them by force. Oh, we're going to Afghanistan. And what fields are we going to take? We're going to take the poppy fields, right? In Afghanistan. We're going to go to Iraq. We're going to take the oil fields of Iraq. What do they have in they got lithium. What do they got in Russia? Okay. Is there lithium in Lithuania? That's a joke. All right. They got grain. They got food production. All right. Where does all your fertilizer come from? What are the things right now that, as a result of sanctions and embargoes, that we're not getting from Russia right now? That's what they want. They covet fields and take them by violence, by force, right? Seize them. When you want a piece of land, you find a way to seize it. When you want someone's house, you take it by fraud and violence. You cheat a man of his prosperity, stealing his family's inheritance. Who does that? Babylon the Great, right? Babylon is fallen, is fallen. Who is that talking about? That's talking about America. All right. So the days of just running up and what happened in Vietnam? They wanted something over there. What happened in Korea? They wanted something. What happened in Libya? Did you go over and take Gaddafi's gold dinars that he was making? Of course you did. We three kings be stealing the gold, right? Let's get Revelation. We'll close. Here's what's coming. Regardless, Revelation 11 and 14, the second woe, Second World War has passed. Behold, the third woe is coming shortly. Okay? Coming soon, coming quickly, soon to come, cometh quickly. All right? The third one, third what? World War will be here soon, coming very soon. Okay? We'll end it right there. See you next week. We hope that the elector edified you brothers and few sisters with that shalom.